I want you to picture a very specific moment. It's a moment that, I mean, it really didn't exist 20 years ago, but now it's just a universal part of the travel experience.
Mm-hmm.
You are standing on a sidewalk in a city you don't know.
Mm.
Maybe it's Lisbon, maybe it's Austin, Texas. You have your luggage, you're tired, and you are staring at a generic gray door, scrolling frantically through your email on your phone, trying to find a 4-digit code for a keypad.
The panic of, did I save the screenshot or is there cell service here?
Exactly. You aren't walking into a lobby with a chandelier. You aren't being greeted by a concierge or a bellhop. You are basically letting yourself into a stranger's house using a code they texted you an hour ago.
And just hoping that the photos you saw online, that they actually match what is behind that gray door.
Right. And we take this for granted now. We just call it booking a rental. But the stack of research and articles you've brought to the table today suggests that this simple swapping a hotel key card for a keypad code has triggered a global economic butterfly effect that is so much messier and more complex than I ever realized.
It is messy, and it is massive. We usually talk about short-term rentals or STRs strictly as a vacation thing. Where should we stay for the wedding, or let's find a place with a pool.
Yeah, it's a consumer product.
It is, but when you actually dive into the history, the economics, and the policy, you realize this isn't just about travel. It is about housing policy, it is about labor laws, and frankly, it is about a massive transfer of wealth that is reshaping our cities.
And that is the mission for this deep dive. We're looking past that glossy app interface. We want to understand the mechanics of this industry. We want to understand the consumer savings because, let's be honest, we all love a deal, but also the massive impact this is having on global housing. Because the picture the research paints is, well, it's stark.
It really is. There is a fascinating, almost startling duality in the material we are unpacking today. On one hand, for you, the traveler, these rentals represent an incredible value proposition. I mean, it's huge.
Okay.
We are seeing data that suggests they can be 25 to 50% cheaper than hotels for month-long stays. That is real money in your pocket.
25 to 50%. That is a huge amount of money.
It is. But on the other hand, the research links these exact same rentals to severe rental crises in places like Australia. We are seeing reports of landlord coercion, literally pressuring low-income residents out of their homes just to flip the units.
Wow.
It is a heavy trade-off. Your cheap vacation might be costing someone else their lease.
It's the classic too good to be true scenario, but it's playing out on a macroeconomic scale. And we have some really specific, almost bizarre case studies to get into later. We are going to talk about parking wars in Santa Cruz.
That one is wild.
Which is a wild story about weaponized zoning, and then there are these strict limits in London, and a massive housing shift in Tasmania that really puts a fine point on all this.
All of which paints a picture of a system that is, really straining at the seams.
So here is the roadmap for the next hour. We're going to start with the basics. What actually is a short-term rental, and where did it come from? Because here is a hint. It didn't start with a guy in a hoodie coding an app in Silicon Valley.
Not at all.
Then we are going to look at the deal for you, the traveler. Why is it so cheap? What are you getting? Then we switch gears and look at the landlord's calculator. We're going to do the math on why property owners are doing this. And finally, we will get into the dark side, the safety issues, the community impact, and how governments are scrambling to try and fix it.
Sounds like a comprehensive plan. Let's dive in.
Okay, let's unpack this. Part 1. Defining the beast. When we say short-term rental, or STR, what are we actually talking about legally and structurally? Is it just any rental that's not a year?
So, at its most basic level, we are defining a short-term rental as a dwelling, usually a furnished, self-contained apartment or house that is rented for a brief period.
And brief period is the key here. We aren't talking about a 12-month lease.
No, not at all. We are talking days to weeks, maybe a month or two. And the distinction that is crucial here, and the research is very clear on this, is that these are explicitly seen as an alternative to hotels.
Right.
They aren't hotels, they don't have the staff, the lobby, the room service, but they are competing for the exact same customer, the same tourist dollar.
But here is where it gets really interesting, and this was a genuine surprise to me in the research. I think most of us, myself included, assume this whole industry just popped up in the last 10 or 15 years with the rise of the internet and smartphones.
Right, the gig economy invention story.
Exactly. We think it's a modern phenomenon, but the research points to a completely different origin story.
Yes, this is a great detail that gets overlooked so often. The short stay rental didn't just appear out of thin air as a vacation hack. It is actually an offshoot of the corporate housing market.
Corporate housing, that sounds incredibly dry and boring.
It was. And that's the point. I want you to go back to, say, 1995. Imagine you are a multinational corporation, a big bank, or a tech firm. You need to send a vice president from New York to London to oversee a merger for 6 weeks. What do you do with him?
I assume you just put him in a hotel. A nice one, probably.
You could, but a hotel room for 45 nights. It is soul-crushing. It is tiny. You are eating room service every single night. It is incredibly expensive for the company. It is just not a viable lifestyle for 6 weeks. You can't live like a human being in a 300-square-foot room for that long.
You'd go absolutely stir crazy.
Exactly. So a niche industry developed called corporate relocation or service apartments.
Yeah.
These were furnished apartments specifically for business people. And they were bland, they were beige, they were functional.
No personality.
Zero personality. They were located in business districts. They had a kitchenette so you could, make toast and a desk so you could work. The whole point was function over form.
So these were professional operations, business to business, B2B.
Completely B2B.
Yeah.
They weren't looking for tourists. They didn't want the backpacker or the bachelorette party. They wanted the chaos-free, guaranteed payment of a Fortune 500 company. It was a boring, stable, high-margin business that operated quietly in the background of the travel industry.
So how did we go from bland corporate apartment for a vice president to renting a treehouse in Bali for a weekend? I mean, how did that leap actually happen?
It was an evolution, really, and a democratization of the model. The concept moved from being strictly for corporate use to private owners and investors realizing, hey, wait a minute, I can do this too. The internet was the catalyst. It just lowered the barrier to entry to almost zero.
Right.
Suddenly, you didn't need to be a corporate housing firm with 500 units and a dedicated sales team to play the game. You could be a guy with a spare bedroom, or a couple who bought an investment condo. The online platforms like Airbnb, which the research mentions specifically, came along and just connected the supply, the private owners, with the demand, which was us.
And the demand side shifted too. It wasn't just a VP on a business trip anymore.
Exactly. It became the backpacker, the family reunion, the person relocating to a new city for a job. And that relocation piece is actually really interesting too. The research mentions popular uses include vacation rental, obviously, but also relocation as a key category.
Which makes perfect sense. If you are moving to a new city, say you got a new job in Chicago, you can't buy a house or sign a lease in a single weekend. You need a landing pad.
Exactly. You need somewhere to live for a month, maybe two, while you hunt for a permanent lease or a house. These STRs fill that gap perfectly. It's bridging that gap between tourist and resident, a temporary home.
So, okay, let's talk about the deal. Why do we, the listeners, the travelers, use them? Why has this industry just completely exploded? Because usually when a new product comes along, it has to be significantly better or significantly cheaper to change consumer behavior on this scale.
In this case, it is often both. It really comes down to value. The research is very, very clear on this. This industry is seen as the most affordable option for month-long stays.
And we have a specific number on that, right? I want to make sure we nail this down because the savings are, well, they're staggering.
We do. The data states they can be 25 to 50% cheaper than a hotel room.
Stop and think about that for a second. 50%. Let's do some quick napkin math. If a decent hotel in a major city is, let's be conservative and say $200 a night, over a month, that's $6,000. You're saying I could potentially get a full house or an apartment for $3,000.
In many markets, yes. That is not a small margin of savings. That is the difference between taking the trip and not taking the trip for a huge number of people.
But it's not just the sticker price, is it? There's a whole hidden layer of savings that I think people intuitively understand but maybe don't calculate out.
The lifestyle savings, or what I like to call the kitchen arbitrage.
The kitchen arbitrage. I like that. Break it down for us.
Well, think about the total economics of staying in a hotel for an extended period. You are paying for the room, sure, but you are effectively trapped in the hotel's economy. You wake up, breakfast is a $25 buffet.
Or a $30 room service tray with sad-looking eggs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lunch, you have to go to a restaurant. Dinner, another restaurant. You want a glass of wine at the end of the day, that'll be $15 at the hotel bar. It just bleeds you dry one small transaction at a time.
And don't even get me started on laundry. Hotel laundry services are, like, criminally expensive. $5 to wash a single pair of socks.
It's absurd. But in an STR, You
Hmm.
typically get a kitchen or at least a kitchenette. You get a washer and dryer. Even if you only eat breakfast at home, eggs and toast from the local grocery store, and you make a sandwich for lunch, you are saving hundreds and hundreds of dollars a week per person.
It totally explains why families with kids gravitate towards them. If you have 2 kids, you are not booking 2 hotel rooms and paying for 4 restaurant meals 3 times a day. That math just doesn't work for most families.
It compounds the savings. The 50% cheaper headline is just the rent. The actual total cost of the trip might be 60% or even 70% cheaper when you factor in all the food and services you're not paying for.
And there is one other factor the research mentions that is a total deal breaker for a huge segment of the population: pets.
Oh, right, the absolute desperation of the dog owner traveler.
Have you ever tried to find a nice hotel that takes a large dog?
Yeah.
Or even a medium-sized dog? It is a nightmare.
It is. The fine print is always dogs under 15 pounds only. Or they have these crazy rules like no pets allowed on furniture. Or they charge a $100 cleaning fee per night.
It just feels like you were being punished for having a pet.
It does. But the research notes that some short-term rental companies and hosts explicitly permit pets. For many travelers, this isn't even about the price. It's about viability. If I can't bring the dog, I can't go on the trip. The STR market realized this massive unmet demand and capitalized on it perfectly.
So on the surface, this sounds amazing. It's cheap, it's convenient, you can bring the dog, you have a kitchen. It sounds like the perfect product. But, and there's always a but on this show, the research also gives us a bit of a reality check on the actual booking process. It isn't always smooth sailing.
No, it's not. It's sort of the Wild West of hospitality. There are friction points that you just don't get with a Marriott or a Hilton where everything is standardized.
Right.
The research lists a few things that can really catch people off guard. Credit checks, for one.
Which you don't usually deal with for a standard hotel room. You just swipe your credit card at the desk and you're done.
Exactly. But if you are booking a place for a month, some hosts essentially treat you like a short-term tenant. They want to know you're good for it. They might run a credit check. Then there are damage deposits and holding deposits, which can tie up hundreds of dollars on your card.
And the big one, the one that everyone complains about on social media, the departure cleaning fee.
Oh, the dreaded cleaning fee.
You see, a room is listed for what seems like a great price, maybe $100 a night. You think, wow, what a deal. You click book, you go to the final checkout screen, and suddenly the total for your 2 nights is $400.
And there's a $200 fee in there. The research notes this is often a departure cleaning fee, which implies it's a fixed cost regardless of whether you stay for 1 night or 10.
It completely changes the math. If you stay for 1 night, a $150 cleaning fee more than doubles your cost. If you stay for a month, it's negligible. It's just spread out.
It almost feels like a hidden tax, but it's also a behavior modification tool from the host's perspective.
What do you mean by that?
Well, hosts use high cleaning fees to discourage one-night stays without explicitly banning them. They want the longer bookings because it's less work, less turnover, less risk.
That makes sense. But there is a bigger risk than just the fee. I call it the real estate catfish.
The catfish, yes. It's a real thing.
The research explicitly warns that online photographs and descriptions can be misleading. You see a picture of a palace, you show up, and it's not a palace. It's a basement apartment with a window facing a brick wall.
It is a genuine risk because unlike a hotel chain where Room 202 in Chicago looks exactly like Room 202 in Seattle, these are all unique properties. You are relying on photos taken by the owner, possibly 5 years ago, possibly with a super wide-angle lens that makes a closet look like a ballroom.
Or they conveniently don't photograph the massive construction site next door that starts jackhammering at 6 a.m. every morning.
Exactly. The research actually gives some actionable advice here that I think is really valuable, though I bet 90% of people, myself included, don't do it.
What's the recommendation?
Make direct contact. The text recommends making contact with the landlord or the agent before you book.
To verify reality, to check if they're a real person.
Basically, to make sure a human is on the other end and that the details align with what is promised. Ask a very specific question. Is the Wi-Fi fast enough for me to do Zoom calls for work? Or is there dedicated street parking, or is it a free-for-all?
Yeah, good point.
If they take 3 days to answer you before they have your money, imagine how long they'll take to answer you when the toilet overflows at 10 p.m. You are vetting the host as much as you are vetting the house.
That is solid advice. You are pre-screening your customer service experience.
Precisely.
Okay, so that is the consumer side. We get it. It's cheap, it's convenient, it offers amenities you can't get in a hotel, but you have to watch out for fees and misleading photos. But now, I want to flip the script. Let's look at the person on the other side of this transaction, the landlord.
This is where we get into the economics of conversion. This is really the engine that is driving this entire industry.
Because presumably, landlords aren't just doing this out of the kindness of their hearts to offer us cheap vacations. They are not running charities.
Definitely not. They are doing it because the math is incredibly, incredibly compelling. The research states very clearly that through short-term rentals, landlords can make upwards of 30% more than they would on a rent-controlled property.
30% more. In the investment world, that is not a small increase. That's a massive delta.
It is huge. It's a game changer. But we need to unpack why that gap exists. The text is very specific. It compares it to a rent-controlled property. That's not an accident.
Right. Explain the difference for us. What is the yield gap here? What does that mean?
So imagine you own a small apartment building in a city with strong tenant protections, like New York or San Francisco or Berlin. You might have a tenant who has been living there for 10, maybe 20 years. Because of rent control or rent stabilization laws, they might be paying, say, $1,500 a month for an apartment that, if it hit the open market today, could easily rent for $3,000.
So the landlord is sitting there looking at that unit on their balance sheet and feeling like they're actively losing $1,500 every single month.
Yeah.
They see it as a loss.
Exactly. It's an opportunity cost. They see the opportunity cost staring them in the face. Now, compare that to the short-term market. That exact same unit, if they can get it back, furnish it with some IKEA furniture and put it on an app, might fetch $150 a night.
Okay, so let's run those numbers. $150 a night. If you rent it for just 20 nights a month, which is a reasonable 66% occupancy rate, that's $3,000 in revenue.
You've just doubled your revenue compared to the long-term rent-controlled tenant. Even if you factor in the cleaning costs, the utilities which you now have to pay, the platform fees which can be significant, you're almost certainly clearing significantly more than that stable $1,500 check. That 30% figure in the research is probably conservative in some really hot tourist markets. It could be much higher.
So if you are a landlord and you are looking at a spreadsheet, the choice seems completely obvious. Pure capitalism dictates you choose the short-term model every single time.
And that choice, that calculation happening thousands of times over in cities around the world, is what leads to what the research calls the conversion phenomenon.
The conversion phenomenon. That sounds like a sci-fi movie title.
It's a little dystopian when you really think about it. Landlords are actively converting properties into STR units. They are taking housing stock that was built for people to live in permanently, to raise families in, to work from, and they are turning it into housing stock for people to visit for a weekend.
They are turning homes into hotels, de facto unregulated hotels.
Yes. And the inevitable consequence of that, logically, is that there are fewer long-term housing options available for permanent residents. It is a zero-sum game in a city with limited space. You can't have the same apartment be both a full-time home for a local family and a full-time tourist rental for visitors.
This is where the rubber really meets the road. It's not just adding new supply for tourists. It's swapping the type of supply that exists.
Exactly. But it gets darker than just supply and demand curves. The process of that conversion isn't always polite. It isn't always clean.
Yeah, this part of the research was tough to read. It's pretty disturbing.
It is. The research highlights that to achieve this conversion, to unlock that 30% profit bump, landlords sometimes have to get the current tenants out. You can't convert an occupied unit.
So what do? You can't just kick someone out, can you?
Well, the text says landlords pressure and coerce people out of their homes.
Pressure and coerce. That is very strong language. We aren't just talking about waiting for a lease to naturally expire.
No. We are talking about, in some cases, harassment. We are talking about neglecting essential repairs so the place becomes unlivable, hoping the tenant will just give up and leave. We are talking about cash for keys offers where they dangle a bit of money to get you to leave quickly without a fight. We are talking about the threat of eviction based on minor technicalities.
And who is being targeted here? Is it the wealthy tenants in the penthouse?
Generally not. The research notes that this pressure is particularly directed at residents who are low income.
And why them specifically?
Vulnerability. They are less likely to have the financial resources to hire a lawyer to fight an illegal or semi-legal eviction. They are less likely to know the nuances of tenant law. They might be more willing to take a small cash payout because they need the money immediately. They are, sadly, the path of least resistance for a landlord looking to flip a unit to the more lucrative short-term market.
So the most vulnerable populations are the ones being actively pushed out to make room for vacationers.
That is what the research indicates. It's a direct displacement. You're taking a home from a low-income resident and giving it to a middle-class tourist because the tourist pays more per night.
That's heavy. It really frames that cheap vacation in a completely different light. When you save 50% on your stay, that discount is coming from somewhere. It has a cost.
It is coming from the efficiency of the online market, sure, but it is also potentially coming from this displacement. It's a hidden subsidy.
So what does this all mean for the big picture? I mean, if this is happening building by building, landlord by landlord, does it actually ripple out to affect the macro market? Or is it just a collection of anecdotal stories?
It absolutely ripples out, and this leads us to part 3 of our roadmap, the ripple effect, the housing crises and global examples.
We have some really specific examples in the research of where this has come to a head. This isn't theoretical anymore.
No, we have hard data now. The research explicitly links short-term rentals to the rental crisis in Australia.
Australia seems to be the canary in the coal mine for this entire issue.
It really is.
Yeah.
Specifically, the rental crisis occurring in 2022. Now, the expert in me has to point out a nuance the research provides here, which is important for accuracy. We have to look at the timeline carefully.
What's the nuance?
The research notes that the number of STRs actually diminished during the COVID-19 pandemic, which was roughly 2019 to early 2022.
Which makes total sense.
Yeah.
No one was traveling. The borders were closed. If you owned an Airbnb in Sydney in 2020, you were making $0. You had an empty, expensive asset.
Right. And what happened? Many of those units actually went back to the long-term rental market during the pandemic because landlords desperately needed cash flow. Any rent was better than no rent.
So for a brief moment, the housing supply for locals actually went up in some places.
It did. But, and this is the key point, despite that temporary dip, the research still attributes the broader rental crisis that hit in 2022 partially to the influence of short-term rentals.
So what happened? As soon as the borders opened, the landlords just kicked the long-term tenants out again and put the vacation signs back up.
In many cases, yes. The structural damage to the market was real. The potential for that higher yield never went away, so that inventory was always at risk of being pulled back out of the long-term pool the second tourism returned. It created incredible instability.
And there's a study from Tasmania that really drives this whole point home. This felt like the smoking gun to me.
This study is crucial. Tasmania, the island state off the coast of Australia, it's a relatively contained market, which makes it perfect for this kind of economic study. A study found that most Airbnb-style short rentals in Tasmania used to be long-term leases.
Wow. Let's just pause on that for a second. So it's not that they built new houses for tourists. They didn't build a new wing of apartments to cater to this market. They took existing long-term houses and just flipped them.
Exactly. It proves the cannibalization theory. The argument from the industry is often, we are just using spare capacity, we are using rooms that would otherwise sit empty. But the Tasmania data says, no, that's not true. You are taking homes that families were living in.
The housing market isn't growing fast enough to accommodate both residents and a huge influx of tourists wanting homes, so the short-term market is literally eating the long-term market.
That is the definition of cannibalization. And when you remove that much supply from the long-term market, basic economics tells you what happens. Prices for everyone else go up. It contributes to the crisis where locals, nurses, teachers, service workers can't afford to live in their own towns.
That is incredibly sobering. So we have the economic displacement, we have the physical displacement of tenants, but there's another layer to this, which is the social displacement, the vibe of the neighborhood, if you will.
The stake in the community argument. It's a huge point of contention.
Right. Part 4, the neighborhood and safety void. The research talks about neighborhood community groups voicing serious concern. What is their beef exactly? Is it just a case of not in my backyard?
No, it's about the degradation of the social fabric of a place. Put yourself in the shoes of a permanent resident for a minute. You live in a quiet cul-de-sac. You know your neighbors, you know their kids, their dogs. Suddenly, the house next to you is sold to an investor who lives 3 states away.
And now it's just a revolving door of strangers.
Every Friday, a new group shows up. Sometimes it's a nice couple on a quiet getaway. Sometimes it's 8 guys for a bachelor party who are there to party until 4 a.m. You have no idea who is coming or going.
Right.
The argument from the community groups, as outlined in the research, is that these temporary residents, tourists, transients, do not have a stake in the community.
They aren't going to be there for the PTA meeting next week. They aren't going to be there for the neighborhood block party. They don't care if the local school board is underfunded or if the park needs a cleanup.
Or even just the absolute basics. Knowing when trash day is, understanding the local parking rules, being considerate about noise late at night. The research says they are less likely to be conscientious about how their behavior affects their temporary neighbors. If you are only there for 3 days and you are never coming back, do you really care if the person next door hates you?
Probably not. You're on vacation mode. Your mindset is different. You want to stay up late, play music on the porch, have a drink.
Exactly. But for the person living next door who has to get up for work at 6 a.m., it's a recurring nightmare. It fundamentally changes the neighborhood from a community of neighbors to a community of strangers with you caught in the middle.
And the research highlights that for a long, long time, there was no one to call. It was a regulatory Wild West. There was no accountability.
This is a massive loophole regarding responsibility, and it's by design.
Unpack that for us. Who is actually responsible when things go wrong?
Well, the platforms and the STR properties often place the responsibility of following local zoning and municipal requirements onto the residents using the services.
Wait, hold on. So if I book a place for a weekend, I'm responsible for knowing the local zoning laws about short-term rentals. That seems completely absurd.
It is absurd. But the platforms often have these long terms of service that nobody reads that say something like, hosts and guests must comply with all local laws and regulations. They legally shift the liability away from themselves. The landlord might be remote, living in another state or another country, so if the police show up because of a noise complaint at midnight, who gets the ticket? The guest.
And this structure, this lack of oversight, leads to what the research calls widespread, illegal short-term rentals.
Yes. Because there is no central oversight, and because it is so profitable, many listings just ignore the rules entirely, assuming they won't get caught.
Illegal in what way? What rules are they breaking?
Well, because these are technically commercial operations, they're businesses running in residential zones, they often avoid all the safety checks and regulations that a legitimate hotel has to follow. The research lists them out. Fire codes. Safety codes.
Hotels have incredibly rigorous fire inspections. They need sprinkler systems, lighted exit signs, clearly marks escape routes, limits on occupancy.
Right. A private home being rented out might have none of that. You might be sleeping in a converted basement with one small window as an exit and no smoke detector. If a fire starts, you are in a much, much more dangerous situation than you would be in a Marriott.
And it also mentions that illegal rentals often avoid paying workers' benefits for the cleaners and any staff they hire.
It's the gig economy problem all over again. The cleaners are often paid under the table, or they're treated as 1099 contractors with no health insurance, no protections, no minimum wage guarantees.
And crucially for the cities, they avoid paying transient occupancy taxes.
This is the big one for any local government. Hotels pay massive taxes on every room they rent, sometimes 10, 12, even 15% on top of the room rate. That money goes directly to the city to pay for roads, schools, police, firefighters. Illegal STRs often just skip this step.
So they're undercutting legitimate hotels, not just by having lower overhead, no staff, no lobby, but by actively skipping the taxes and safety regulations that hotels must follow by law.
Precisely. They are playing the game on easy mode, while legitimate hotels are stuck playing on hard mode. And in doing so, they undercut those businesses and, the research argues, they potentially endanger guests who are unknowingly staying in unregulated and possibly unsafe properties.
That is a dangerous combination. So naturally, cities aren't just sitting back and watching this happen anymore. They're starting to fight back.
They are. And this is the policy battleground. This is part 5. Local lawmakers are facing this massive policy challenge. How do you keep the tourism dollars? Because tourists do spend money at local restaurants and shops, but stop the housing bleed and the neighborhood chaos.
It's a very delicate balancing act, but we have two very different and I would say very creative examples of how cities are tackling this in the research. Let's start with London.
London went for the hard cap. They looked at the profitability model that we discussed earlier, the math that drives landlords to convert properties, and they decided to just break that math.
How did they do it?
The research notes that as of 2019, London restricted short-term rentals to 90 days.
90 days total per year.
Yes. The total number of nights you can rent out a property on a short-term basis cannot exceed 90 days in a single calendar year.
Okay, so walk us through the logic there. How does that 90-day cap actually fix the problem?
Well, remember that 30% profit premium we talked about? That relies on high occupancy throughout the year. It relies on renting the place out for maybe 200 or 250 nights a year to make it more profitable than a long-term lease.
Right.
If you are legally capped at only 90 nights, You can only generate revenue for 3 months of the year.
And for the other 9 months, the place just sits empty and costs you money.
Exactly. And most investors can't afford to have an expensive asset in London sit empty for 9 months. It completely destroys the yield. So it forces the landlord's hand. They have to say, well, the math doesn't work as a full-time hotel anymore. I can't leave it empty, so I might as well put it back on the long-term rental market and get a stable year-round income.
It forces the inventory back to the residents. That is incredibly smart. It's a surgical approach.
It is. It tries to distinguish between someone who is casually renting out their own home while they're on vacation for a few weeks, which easily fits under the 90-day limit, versus a commercial investor who buys up a portfolio of apartments just to run them as hotels, which needs 365 days of availability to maximize profit. It targets the commercial operators without hurting the casual host.
Okay, now the second example is from Santa Cruz, California. And this one is, it's creative, it's almost petty, but in a genius way, it involves parking.
The parking wars. Yes, this is a great example of a local government using whatever tools they have available when they can't easily ban the activity itself for political or legal reasons.
Or what do they do?
The research says local supervisors in Santa Cruz discussed implementing parking restrictions in neighborhoods that had a high density of short-term rentals.
Parking restrictions, like no parking for tourist signs.
Basically, yeah. They created residential permit zones. If you are a resident of that street, you get a sticker for your car. You can park on the street, no problem. If you don't have that sticker, you can't park there, maybe for more than an hour or two.
And since short-term guests aren't residents, they can't get a sticker. Their rental car is out of luck.
Exactly. The stated goal, according to the research, was to discourage people from staying there and to prioritize the local residents' ability to park their own cars in front of their own homes.
That is fascinating. It's not banning the rental itself. It's not saying you can't rent this house. It's saying, sure, you can rent it, but your guest is going to have to park 3 miles away and take a bus.
It makes the product significantly worse. It's a form of weaponized zoning. If you're a tourist and you can't park your rental car, you might look at that Airbnb listing and say, you know what, this is too much hassle. I'll just book the Holiday Inn down the street that has its own parking garage.
It effectively pushes the demand back toward the traditional regulated hotel industry by making the STR product inconvenient and less appealing.
It shows just how desperate some communities are to reclaim their neighborhoods. When you start messing with parking permits as a tool to solve a housing crisis, you know things have gotten really, really tense.
It really does. So, wow, we have covered a massive amount of ground here. They've gone all the way from the corporate housing origins, the boring service departments of the 90s, to the modern app explosion.
Right.
We've looked at the massive savings for travelers, that incredible 25–50% cut, but we balanced it against the 30% profit incentive for landlords that is driving this whole conversion phenomenon.
And we have seen the fallout from that. The supply crunch in the housing market, the coercion of low-income residents, the safety loopholes, and now the regulatory backlash in places like London and Santa Cruz.
It's a classic cycle, isn't it? Innovation creates a new value proposition. That value creates greed. Greed creates a host of social and economic problems. And those problems eventually create regulation.
Perfectly put. And we are currently deep in the regulation phase of that cycle. The Wild West days are, for the most part, ending.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave the listener with a final provocative thought. We know the current state of play. We see the battle lines being drawn. But where is this all going?
That is the big question. And if we connect this all back to the beginning, back to the value proposition for the traveler, I think we have to ask, if cities continue to clamp down, if more places adopt London's 90-day limit or Santa Cruz's parking bans or other new creative restrictions, what happens to that price advantage?
Right. If the supply of short-term rentals gets capped or legally restricted, basic economics says the prices of the remaining legal ones will go up.
Exactly. Will that 25–50% savings just disappear? Are we watching the end of the golden era of cheap, convenient travel that we've all gotten used to?
It's a very real possibility.
It is. It's very possible that in 10 years, short-term rentals will turn back into what they started as a luxury niche product or a corporate necessity for that VP on a long assignment rather than the budget alternative for the masses. The days of finding a dirt-cheap, 2-bedroom apartment in the city center for a weekend might just be numbered.
That is a fascinating thing to mull over. The cheap weekend getaway as we know it might be an endangered species.
It might be. But if the trade-off for that is more stable, affordable housing for local residents, maybe that's the correction the market needs. It's a complicated balance.
Well, on that cheery note, No, seriously, thank you for breaking this all down with us. This was truly eye-opening.
My pleasure. It's a complex topic.
And to you, listening right now, the next time you are scrolling through those listings for a trip, maybe take a closer look. Maybe check the parking situation. Maybe check if the host has one listing or 50. Just think a little bit more about the neighborhood you are essentially buying into for the weekend.
Knowledge is power, even when you're on vacation.
Exactly. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.